confined to an enclosure marked too hazardous for contact. He was forsaken by the very institution that had once relied on him. Without an identity or history, there was only a pair of quivering eyes and a quietness no one ventured to interpret. Then, a man merely passing by hesitated at his pen. In that solitary look, an unvoiced understanding was exchanged. The subsequent discovery by Clay unraveled a concealed reality few were prepared for, and a connection that would permanently alter both their existences. Let us commence. The downpour seemed particularly oppressive that morning in Bellingham, Washington, a municipality shrouded in clouds where the heavens consistently appeared uncomfortably close. Situated behind an unremarkable chain-link barrier at a privately operated refuge on the city's outskirts was a canine no one wished to discuss. He was sizable, with a dark coat, his physique gaunt enough to indicate that time had treated him harshly. The notice on his enclosure proclaimed a caution most heeded without hesitation. Aggressive. Do not approach. For the majority, he represented a difficulty, a risk, merely another entry in their records. He possessed no name, only a numeral imprinted on a tag, its edges long corroded. Rumors circulated among the personnel. He had allegedly nipped at an individual, attempted to bite another, snarled incessantly. Too far deteriorated, too erratic. He received food via a long-handled implement, his area was cleaned indirectly, and he had not been taken for a walk in weeks. His gaze did not pursue people with inquisitiveness. It followed them with silent assessment. No confidence remained behind those weary, golden eyes, only watchfulness, a will to survive. Volunteers hurried past his pen, their pace invariably a bit swifter, their posture a little more rigid as they cast sidelong glances. A few experienced compassion, most felt apprehension, yet all of them perceived the designation before they acknowledged the spirit within. Consequently, day after day, the dog remained in quietude, devoid of playthings, callers, or prospects. Then, as if through serendipity, destiny, or an even more subtle force, a man entered the refuge that Thursday morning. His purpose was not adoption. He was uncertain even of his reason for pausing there. He possessed a container of old blankets in his truck's rear and surmised they would serve a better purpose at a shelter than accumulating dust in his garage. His name was Clay Harrington, aged 48, a welder by profession, with a limp that narrated its own history. He was not garrulous, did not request a tour, merely deposited the blankets and made to depart. But then the barking ceased. Animal shelters are seldom tranquil. They resonate with a perpetual din of enclosures, claws, and imploring gazes. Yet, when Clay turned, one section had fallen silent. A solitary pen, just one, seemed to hold its breath. No yelps, no motion, only observation. And Clay, compelled by an indefinable something, approached it. As he drew nearer, the atmosphere grew palpably denser. The dog remained still, neither snarling nor withdrawing. It simply met Clay's stare, engaged in an interchange that transcended reason and penetrated something more ancient, more profound. Clay halted, not from apprehension, but from understanding. He had encountered such eyes previously. Eyes that did not implore, eyes that did not assign fault, eyes that bore the weight of too many nights and too few aspirations. A staff member materialized swiftly, their voice subdued and wary. "That one is restricted," they stated. "He is unsuitable for anyone. We've had him for some time. He does not interact well with humans." Clay nodded unhurriedly but did not retreat. He merely gazed through the corroded bars as the rain intensified, its drops falling rhythmically between them. The shelter receded. The sounds vanished. And all that persisted in that instant was a man who had forfeited a piece of himself and a dog in whom no one dared to place faith. Neither stirred. And in some way, within that quietude, a dialogue had already commenced. The subsequent morning, Clay returned. This time, there were no blankets, no pretext, merely a silent urging in his heart that indicated the narrative behind those eyes remained incomplete. The shelter personnel regarded him with the expression typically reserved for individuals about to enter a blazing building armed only with a glass of water. "You've truly come back for him?" one inquired, motioning towards the enclosure at the row's end. Clay offered no reply. He simply proceeded directly to the dog's gate and seated himself, not within, not excessively near, just on the opposing side where the air hung heavy with the aroma of damp concrete and corrosion. He remained there for 15 minutes, then an hour, and then longer, uttering nothing, doing nothing, allowing stillness to achieve what words could not. The dog observed him, motionless, as if scrutinizing Clay's every respiration, every eye blink, every minor movement of his fingers. Most canines would bark, snarl, or retreat. This one did not. He simply stayed vigilant and quiet, like one who has been wounded by every trusted sound. This established a pattern. Clay came back the following day and the day after that. Each occasion, the same location, the same quietude, until one evening, just as daylight began to wane behind the trees, the dog did something unforeseen. As Clay settled onto the concrete, the dog slowly lay down as well, not from weariness, but in unison, like two spirits reflecting one another. No words were exchanged between them, only the passage of time and their shared presence. By the fourth visit, Clay commenced whispering, "Small things, you are not damaged. They have misjudged you. I too have been dismissed." He was not attempting to be insightful, he was merely conversing, not with an animal, but with a being compelled into silence. The dog did not stir, but its breathing decelerated. Its ears twitched less frequently. Its eyes no longer darted about, they remained fixed, focused on the man opposite him, as if perhaps, just perhaps, an internal change was occurring. On the fifth day, Clay arrived with a piece of chicken. He did not present it directly, he merely placed it on the ground and retreated. The dog initially remained still. Then, slowly and purposefully, he neared it, sniffed, glanced at Clay, and then consumed it. Each mouthful felt like a barrier disintegrating piece by piece. There was still no barking, still no wagging tail, but that was not the objective. This was not concerned with tricks or orders, it was about trust, a slow, unrefined, arduous trust. That evening, the shelter director took Clay aside. "He has been here for nearly a year," she stated softly. "You are the sole individual he has not attempted to bite." Clay inclined his head. Perhaps he isn't trying to bite anyone. Perhaps he is simply finished with individuals who treat him as if he already has. A silence ensued. Then, for the first time, Clay posed the question that had been crystallizing within him since that initial intense gaze, "May I adopt him?" The atmosphere grew tense. "Sir, I must be candid. If you take him, you do so contrary to our advice. He is marked, dangerous, potentially unstable. The responsibility rests with you. We cannot assist you if an incident occurs." Clay did not flinch. "That dog does not frighten me," he asserted. "What frightens me is what people did to make him this way." The personnel exchanged looks. Documents were retrieved. Stipulations were recited. But ultimately, the procedure commenced unhurriedly and with caution. And in that enclosure, the dog stood as Clay affixed his signature to the initial form and gently pressed his scarred nose against the gate. No one spoke, yet everyone witnessed it. That dog had just declared his preference. Taking the dog home ought to have signified the conclusion of a sorrowful period. Yet, as Clay navigated the rain-swept streets of Bellingham, with the dog curled compactly in the truck bed, quiet and still, it felt more like an introduction. The shelter had included a slim file folder, secured with staples, bearing the faint red inscription, "Restricted." This did not sit comfortably with Clay. A dog designated so severely should have been accompanied by extensive behavioral observations, incident summaries, perhaps even a record of medications. However, the file was nearly devoid of content. A single paragraph, merely 7 lines, and its omissions were more telling than its inclusions. Former service dog. Handler unknown. Retired following incident. Unit classified. Recommend permanent isolation. There were no birth certificates, no veterinary examination records, not even a name. Just a vacuous account attempting to obliterate the past through oversimplification. Clay furrowed his brow. Something was amiss. It wasn't merely scant. It was deliberate, a veil drawn over something. He perused to the end and discovered a telephone number listed under previous affiliation. Upon dialing, it rang 4 times before disconnecting. No answering service, no dial tone, only silence. That quietness resonated more powerfully than a shriek. Clay was not inclined to pry into matters that did not concern him, but when someone conceals their actions so effectively, it ceases to be mere inquisitiveness and becomes an instinct. The following morning, he journeyed for 2 hours to the address specified in the document, a deactivated government installation on the outskirts of Tacoma. Barbed wire drooped along the boundary. The gate was secured with a rusted chain, and faded government notices cautioned against trespassing, though it appeared no one had upheld that regulation in years. Through the chain-link fence, he could discern the skeletal remains of what were once training grounds. No vehicles, no human sounds, only the wind and recollections. Upon returning home, the dog, still lacking a name, traversed the floors of Clay's unpretentious dwelling as if he had been there previously. He did not investigate his surroundings with the usual canine curiosity. Instead, he surveyed corners, observed windows, and slept with his back against the wall. Each motion was systematic, strategic, not like a companion animal but like a serviceman. Clay resolved to give him a name not solely for practicality, but because the quietness was becoming overwhelming. He required a term to anchor this entity. One evening, while dining on the porch, Clay glanced down and softly uttered, "Shadow." The dog did not react with a start, nor did he incline his head. He simply returned Clay's gaze, composed and still, then approached and seated himself beside Clay's chair. It was not an affirmation. It was an accord. That night, as Clay re-examined the file, he observed an unusual item adhered to its base. A partially torn label, sewn onto a pouch that had been affixed with tape to the folder's reverse side. It was aged and tattered, yet 3 elements remained discernible. K9-14, iron field, and a faded American flag insignia. There was no rank, no handler identification, only these details. Clay researched the terms on the internet. Nothing emerged, no unit, no records, no mission summaries. Iron field did not exist, at least not in any publicly accessible domain. The fragments of information were not cohering. Clay reclined in his chair, gazing at Shadow, who was now recumbent, his eyes half closed, his chest rising faintly with each breath. Whatever this dog had endured, it had been profound, concealed, and locked away. Yet, Clay could not dismiss the conviction that Shadow recalled everything. Every command, every injury, every bereavement. The following morning, Clay completed the final adoption document at the shelter. The personnel issued a concluding caution. If any incident occurs, anything at all, you are solely responsible. We will not accept him back. Clay did not waver. Good, he replied, because I do not return things that are important to me. Shadow stood by the entrance without summons. No lead, no order. He simply exited as if he belonged to someone once more, as if the burden of whatever tormented him had eased infinitesimally, just sufficiently for recuperation to commence. And somewhere beneath that indurated exterior, something stirred. Not hostility, not rebelliousness, but acknowledgement. The initial few days at Clay's residence were tranquil, yet not in a reassuring manner. Shadow moved about the house like a specter retracing pathways from an existence he could not forget. He did not exhibit tail wagging or curious sniffing. He merely ambled from one room to another, invariably pausing at windows, consistently inspecting corners. Even while recumbent, his ears would twitch at the faintest creak of the floorboards. Clay made no attempt to caress him. He understood better. Recuperation did not commence with displays of affection. It began with personal space and the presence of someone who would not flee at the initial fissure in his defenses. On the 3rd night, the stillness was violently disrupted. Clay was abruptly awakened by a sound that seemed unreal. A scream, but emanating from a dog. Not a whimper, not a howl, but a shriek that seemed to tear at the walls and send a shiver down his spine. He leaped from his bed and discovered Shadow convulsing in the living room, limbs thrashing, breath labored, eyes tightly shut as if trapped within a battle from which he could not awaken. Clay did not raise his voice, nor did he make physical contact. He knelt, just near enough for his voice to be heard. "Shadow," he said, his tone steady and low. "You are no longer there. You are home now." The dog started awake with a gasp, eyes wild and bewildered, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Yet he did not pounce. He did not snarl. He simply looked at Clay, trembling as if suspended between aggression and breakdown. Clay maintained eye contact, no sympathy, just his presence. Shadow retreated to a corner and sat, head lowered, declining to meet Clay's gaze again. It was at that juncture Clay comprehended that the aggression was not arbitrary. It was recollection, deeply embedded triggers. The sound of helicopters passing overhead during daylight hours caused Shadow to wince. Abrupt, loud noises like screeching tires or fireworks sent him scrambling beneath the table. This was not fear. It was conditioning that had never been deprogrammed. Later that week, while sifting through the belongings the shelter had provided, Clay discovered a pouch concealed within the folds of an old towel. Inside was an insignia, tattered, soiled, almost indecipherable. Yet Clay identified portions of it. The American flag, stitched and faded to a muted blue, the alphanumeric identifier K9-14, and the phrase OP Iron Field embroidered below it. It signified nothing to him initially, yet there was an air of concealment about it. He conducted an online search. No results, no records, no missions. The only discoveries were a few fragmented discussions in obscure forums, military message boards where individuals shared redacted narratives, pieces of information, conjectures. One entry simply stated, "Iron Field was never meant to occur. Those who returned damaged." The post was dated, unresponded to, but Clay stared at it for a considerable time. That night, Shadow curled up in the corridor outside Clay's room. He did not scratch at the door. He did not whimper. He simply lay there like a sentry guarding someone he had not yet resolved to trust. And Clay, lying awake in the quiet, could not cease contemplating the eyes that had gazed through him that first day at the shelter. There was no insanity in them, no fury, merely a profound, sorrowful grief. Clay understood that dogs did not harbor secrets. But whatever Shadow carried, it was not intended to remain hidden. It was a signal meant to be overlooked. And Clay, he was finished with overlooking. Shadow had started to become more settled, or so Clay believed. The restless pacing diminished, the nocturnal frights occurred less frequently, and at times, when the afternoon sunlight streamed perfectly through the living room window, Shadow would rest his head on his paws and allow himself to respire deeply. However, healing is a multifaceted process, and certain injuries do not manifest until the atmosphere is calm and the world becomes sufficiently quiet for the past to reemerge. Clay, still troubled by the fruitless search related to the OP Iron Field insignia, found himself pursuing understanding in the sole manner he knew, through companionship. He began taking Shadow on extended walks through the Cascade Woods, just beyond the town's periphery. Serene paths, thick foliage, no vehicular traffic, no other people, only earth, air, and the sound of footfalls that gradually synchronized. Initially, Shadow moved ahead like a soldier on reconnaissance. Every rustle in the undergrowth caused his ears to pivot like satellite receivers, and every open space was approached with tentative steps and profound scrutiny. Clay did not guide him, he permitted Shadow to select the route. It was a form of therapy for which neither possessed words, yet both comprehended. Then, during one such excursion, a peculiar event transpired. Shadow halted abruptly in the center of a clearing encircled by lofty fir trees and moist moss. No motion, no birdsong, just an extended, vacant stare at a particular spot on the ground. He sniffed once, circled twice, then lay down, not from fatigue, but from veneration. Clay inclined his head, perplexed. "What is it?" he murmured. No reply came naturally, but the implication was clear. This was not merely a section of forest, it held significance. Clay approached and surveyed the ground. It appeared undisturbed, perhaps slightly uneven, perhaps somewhat unsettled, as if the soil had been churned long ago, buried, and forgotten. A chilling sensation crept up Clay's spine. He looked down at Shadow, who was now lying prone, motionless but alert, the kind of posture one might observe at a grave site, indicative not of fear, but of allegiance. Clay knelt and cleared away some pine needles. Beneath them, the earth was loose, not recently disturbed, but not entirely natural either. He resisted drawing hasty conclusions, yet instincts are seldom wrong, and Shadow's demeanor had altered. He was not being protective, he was grieving. Clay marked the location with a cairn of stones before they departed. Without uttering a word on the return journey, the image remained with him throughout the night, and by morning he knew he could not disregard it. He packed a small spade and went back with Shadow. But just as he knelt to commence digging, a voice called out from behind him, "Hey, you can't dig there." Clay turned to see two park rangers in brown jackets positioned a few feet behind the tree line. One carried a clipboard, the other an impassive expression that belied the casualness of his tone. "This is protected land," the taller one stated. "No unauthorized activity permitted. You are trespassing." Clay rose slowly. "I didn't observe any signs. We are requesting that you depart now." There was an unusual quality to their tone, too insistent, too practiced. Shadow remained still but fixed his gaze on the shorter ranger, ears flattened, body low, not in fear, but in a state of readiness. Clay noted this. He nodded and retreated. "Okay, we'll go." As they walked away, Clay glanced back. The rangers had not moved, they simply stood there observing until he and Shadow vanished behind the trees. Back at his house, Clay could not shake the feeling, the timing, the location, the contrived smile on the rangers' faces. Something was being concealed out there, and Shadow had recalled where it was interred. Not a scent, not instinct, but memory. And whatever lay beneath that soil, it was not destined to remain buried indefinitely. Following the encounter with the rangers, Clay's sleep was disturbed. The swiftness of their appearance, their abrupt manner of speaking, the subtle admonition in their eyes, it all felt wrong. Shadow had perceived it as well. Since their return from the woods, he had maintained a constant watch on the door, no pacing, no whimpering, just silent alertness, as if he anticipated something but could not articulate what. He did not behave fearfully, he behaved as if prepared. Clay had resided in solitude for years, yet now he felt he had a quiet companion in endurance. Shadow moved through the house as though he had committed its layout to memory within a day. If a floorboard groaned, his ears twitched. If headlights swept past the window, he stood motionless in the shadows until they disappeared. Clay had no need to instruct him on anything, he already knew. Whatever had molded Shadow remained deeply embedded within him, active beneath the surface like an unexploded ordnance awaiting detonation. The subsequent morning, Clay undertook the 2-hour journey to a Veterans Support Center in Seattle. He entered with nothing more than a folded insignia and a name that seemingly did not exist, Opie Ironfield. At the reception, he was greeted with a courteous smile and a set of registration forms. However, when he inquired if any staff member had knowledge of the operation, the woman paused. Her expression did not alter, but her fingers ceased their movement. "You will not find any information on that here," she stated. "Classified." "That is the issue," Clay responded. "There is nothing. It is not classified, it is expunged." She nodded slowly, then leaned closer. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, a retired officer emerged to meet him. His name was Reed, a weathered countenance, a firm handshake, and eyes that suggested he had witnessed too much and spoken too little. Clay placed the insignia on the table between them. Reed did not touch it, he simply stared. "Where did you acquire this?" Clay hesitated. "A dog." Reed leaned back. His expression remained unchanged, but the tension in the room intensified. That insignia was not meant to endure. Nor were the dogs. Clay frowned. What transpired? Reed shook his head. "That unit never existed. That is all I am permitted to tell you. But someone interred something in the woods. My dog, he led me directly to it. And then 2 rangers appeared as if they were monitoring us. Something is amiss." Reed stood. "If you value that dog, cease your inquiries." Clay departed with more questions than answers, and none of them provided any comfort. That night, Clay entered his workshop, seeking solitude to contemplate. As he switched on the light, Shadow darted from a corner with the speed of lightning, tail stiff, nose pressed to a wooden crate beneath the workbench. He began to paw at it, pacing in tight circles. Clay opened it. Inside, concealed behind old bolts and spools of wire, was a small military radio. It was inactive, covered in dust. But when Clay turned the dial, it sputtered to life, emitting only static and faint, unintelligible, ethereal voices. Shadow sat beside it and remained motionless. Clay looked at him. "You recognize the sound, don't you?" The dog's eyes did not blink, they stayed fixed on the frequency. And it was then Clay understood Shadow had not merely recalled a location, he recalled everything. Yet the world had made every effort to forget him. By the week's conclusion, Clay had resolved. He would return. Not from defiance, nor even for answers. He simply sensed that the spot in the forest, the one where Shadow had sunk down with that slow, sorrowful stillness, contained something no one wished to confront. And if no one else would investigate, he would. He did not use the main path this time. He parked at a greater distance and trekked the alternative route through the trees, Shadow moving silently ahead as if he already knew the way. When they arrived at the clearing, the stones Clay had piled as a marker had vanished, every single one. The ground had been raked, disturbed, and cleared as if someone had come to obliterate a mark before it was detected. But they had not eliminated the scent. Shadow commenced circling once more, not agitatedly, but purposefully, methodically. He stopped at the identical spot and lay down again, adopting the same posture, maintaining the same silence. Clay looked down and noticed it, slight depressions in the earth, recent but shallow. His heart pounded more intensely. The spade was produced. He dug slowly with care. Shadow remained still. 5 inches down, the spade's tip struck something firm. It was not a root, it was fabric, thick and weathered, wrapped around something unyielding. Clay pulled with both hands and exhumed a tarpaulin bundle secured with old twine, decayed in sections but still whole. He did not unwrap it immediately. He looked at Shadow. The dog did not avert his gaze. So Clay opened the tarpaulin. Inside were bones, small, too small to be human, yet unmistakably animal. Collars, metal tags, 4 of them, and 1 dog badge, twisted and bent, the name barely decipherable, Rico. Clay froze, not from fear, but from rage. His stomach churned. These were not animals interred by loving owners, these were abandoned partners, discarded, concealed, forgotten, expunged as if they had never held any significance. Shadow rose and stepped forward slowly, then sat beside the tarpaulin, no whine, no growl, just his presence, as if keeping a silent watch over brethren no one else had properly laid to rest. Clay took photographs, every angle, every tag, then gently rewrapped the tarpaulin. He did not wish to leave them there, but he was unsure what else to do at that moment. This was no longer merely about trauma, this was evidence, and that signified peril. By the time he reached home, his email inbox was inundated with notifications and warnings. One message was particularly conspicuous: no sender, no subject, just a single line: "You need to stop, or we'll come for the dog." He did not sleep that night. At 3 a.m. he heard the sound of shattering glass. Clay rushed outside to discover his truck had been vandalized, windows smashed, tires slashed. A message was spray-painted across the hood: "Bury it again." He turned to find Shadow standing on the porch, body taut, growling low, not barking, not retreating, eyes fixed on the woods behind the house. That growl conveyed everything. They were no longer issuing warnings, they were observing. Shadow had not merely endured something brutal, he had remembered it, and now someone else was aware that he remembered. Clay did not squander another moment anticipating someone else to come forward. That morning, he uploaded every photograph he had taken of the tarpaulin, the badge, the bone fragments, the obliterated insignia, and the message he had received: no embellishments, no grandiose assertions, only facts. He titled the post with a question that encapsulated it all: why are America's service dogs being interred in secrecy? The internet erupted. Within 48 hours, national journalists were at his front entrance. His email was inundated with requests for interviews, inquiries from fact-checkers, and messages from military whistleblowers, some currently serving, others long retired. They were not astonished by the photographs, they were deeply troubled by them. One by one, they came forward, not with official documents, but with their own recollections: dogs assigned to missions of such peril that their survival was unforeseen, units disbanded without prior notice. K9s designated unsuitable upon their return, broken, trembling, still suffering internally. The story gained momentum not due to its sensational nature, but because it resonated as a betrayal the nation was reluctant to believe possible. Shadow became the emblem, not a mascot, but a survivor, the dog who did not bark for attention, who did not pursue toys or solicit treats. He simply stood beside Clay whenever cameras appeared, composed, vigilant, silent, as if he comprehended that the commotion was not for him, it was for those who had not returned. Eventually, the shelter that had once labeled him too dangerous to rehome issued a public declaration, an apology. They asserted they had no knowledge of his past, no means of knowing what he had undergone. And perhaps they did not, but the public now perceived the truth. Donations poured in. A local foundation offered land near the Cascade Woods to erect a memorial for the forgotten K9s of Operation Iron Field and those whose service remained classified. The irony was stark: the location they had once attempted to conceal became a place of reverence. And Clay, he did not cease his efforts. He brought Shadow with him to every event, every discussion panel, every unveiling, not because it made for a compelling photograph, but because it was significant. Each time he uttered the dog's name, he did so in honor of those who did not receive a second chance, for those who were buried beneath pine needles, nameless, tagged, and erased. On the day the memorial was unveiled, the wind was still. Veterans stood side by side. Reporters lowered their microphones. There were no chants, no slogans, only rows of people observing as a bronze plaque was revealed. And on that plaque, just 12 words: for those who served in silence. And the ones who stayed. Shadow stood beside Clay, motionless. And as Clay knelt and whispered, "You're home now," the dog rested his head on Clay's foot, not from exhaustion, but because he could finally find repose. No orders, no handlers, no leash, just peace. And this time, no one would take it from him.